I'm fixing up your grandparents' house to turn it into a rental for tourists. Your parents' house is practically ours now, isn't it? Suddenly, my in-laws chime in together. Your lazy wife can get a job for $2 an hour. Exactly. The lazy wife who doesn't even work part-time can start working here from dawn till dusk. As the three of them collectively berate me, two figures emerge from inside the house. It was Mark and Julie, my son and daughter. Must be nice being a college student. Who do you think is paying for your education? We haven't used a penny of Dad's money for tuition or living expenses, unlike high school. Not only Mark and Julie's words surprised Kyle, but also my in-laws. What do you mean? Michelle. That's when I couldn't help but open my mouth. Huh? You guys don't know? Yes. The children's tuition and other expenses weren't relying on Kyle anymore. My name is Michelle. A 45-year-old housewife living in a small city in the US. Ever since Mark and Julie went to college in New York, it's been just Kyle and me living together. Currently, my children are living near my parents' house in the suburbs of New York. Mark wants to become an expert architect, and Julie aims to be a curator, dedicating their lives to study. However, Kyle has never had good feelings towards my parents' house, which welcomes our children as boarders. Ultimately, this sentiment may have been what destroyed our relationship in the end. Kyle has always been dissatisfied with something. Not just my parents' house, but especially his job. I'm gonna quit that job, he's been saying for about the last 10 years. Kyle works at a regional sales office for the company I used to work for. Upon our marriage, he transferred to an office in the state where my in-laws live. And these in-laws of mine have never really gotten along with me. Since my in-laws' house is somewhat far from the workplace, I rent a condo, but whenever they have time, they drive over to our place. And when Kyle complains about work, they blame me, saying, it's because you're not supporting him properly. A wife is supposed to encourage and uplift her husband. Complaining about work is inevitable. But what can I say when Kyle won't even share the reasons for his complaints with me? For the past 10 years, I've always felt this frustration towards him. Moreover, Kyle's dissatisfaction with his job also extends to our children. As his salary hardly increases, Kyle often complains. So, I suggested working part-time. But Kyle wouldn't allow it, insisting that I stay home, keep the house perfect, and wait for him. What about the kids' future education? I argued, but they should just go to a nearby public university, he'd retort. Kyle, for his part, always seemed to think about the children's education as cheaply as possible. Only public universities close to home are acceptable, he'd always tell my children. But the kids rebelled as much as they could against their father. Where in this state can you find a university that offers architecture? Sure, there are universities where you can get a curator's degree, but the number of museums and galleries is overwhelmingly different between here and New York. Kyle was incredibly irritated by the children's reasoning. Who do you think is paying for this? Every time I witnessed such exchanges, I sighed. I believe it's a parent's responsibility to nurture their children's talents as much as possible. Indeed, my parents did the same for me. And the children are so talented it's hard to believe they're ours. From high school, they were assured they could easily get into their desired universities in New York. How could we not invest in our children's future? I've always felt this way. So, I contacted my father. By this time, my mother had passed away, and my father was living alone at home. Though in his 80s, my father was still physically fit and could manage household chores, though he did have a helper come by for errands occasionally. As someone who was dearly loved by my parents, I was worried about my father living alone. As the youngest of 4 siblings, I have 3 older brothers. After our mother's death, these brothers also expressed concern for our father, suggesting living together or a care facility, but he insisted on staying in his own home, so we ended up just checking in on him occasionally. So, I suggested to Kyle, how about also using my parents' home for boarding as a way to keep an eye on Dad? Kyle was like, if that works, sure. Seemed like as long as it didn't cost a dime for the kids' place, he was okay with it. And then he dropped this bomb. Since I'm gonna be looking after, make them pay for their own grub. When he blatantly said that, I was pretty ticked off, no lie. But honestly, Dad was thrilled the grandkids were coming by so often. About the food costs, he said, "Don't fret, I've got savings," so I took him up on it. And off the kids went, with a, "Make sure to do your chores. Take care of Grandpa for me." Then, last year, Dad passed away. "Grandpa's gone. Mom, you gotta come quick." It was Julie on the phone from the hospital. While I was catching a taxi and train, the young ones were scrambling at the hospital, handling arrangements, and then ended up being there at the end. When I finally made it to the hospital, all that was left was Dad, silent. Seeing me, both kids just lunged and hugged me, crying. I hugged them back and said, "Thank you." Meanwhile, I had been calling my brothers spread out everywhere during the way to gather the family. What followed was the wake and the funeral. Then discussing inheritance while relatives were around. But then, one of my brothers asked, "Hey, Michelle, what's up with your husband, Kyle?" I couldn't answer at that moment. When I rushed out after getting the call, I only messaged Kyle, "Dad's critical, heading to my parents, he's passed, so wake and funeral." Yeah, I couldn't get through to Kyle directly. So, I even called his work. All they said was he was on leave. When I finally got hold of Kyle, it was already the funeral day. And Kyle said, "Your dad's funeral, it's today, right? You've got 3 siblings, no need for me to show up now." At that moment, any feelings I had for Kyle just went cold. And the word divorce started bubbling up in my mind amidst all this funeral stuff. Since then, unbeknownst to Kyle, I started taking steps towards divorce. Then one day, out of the blue, "Hey, we're heading to your parents' place." "Wait, my parents? To see them?" "Oh, yeah, I can see them too." Though I wondered if that was really the point, I kept talking. Still had questions. "But it's a weekday today, right? Took a day off?" "Work? Oh, quit that job." "What?" My eyes just popped. "Haven't heard a peep about that." "Huh? Didn't think I needed to tell you." "Of course you do. What are you talking about? I'm your wife and handle our finances, how can I not know?" Kyle knew best how much we needed money without loans for my children to go to college in the city. He was against their chosen schools, thought that. But why now, of all times? Anyway, we're going. With that, Kyle just hauled me into the car, not letting me say a word, and drove off to my parents' house. The silence in the car was so heavy, I had to turn on the radio to bear it. Naturally, not a word at the service area stops either. And when we finally got to my parents in the early afternoon, there was a familiar car already parked. Not just that. Vans and trucks from an interior work company were there too. What on earth was happening at my parents' place? "You're late, Kyle. We've been waiting forever, you know." Just as I was checking the license plates, those voices hit me. "Why are you here?" "What's this, Kyle? Haven't told her yet?" "Michelle's just slow to catch on. I need to spell it out for her, right?" Slow to catch on. How many times had I heard that from them? Used to hear it all the time back in the day. So much so, I'd even adjusted how I talked to match them more. But they're bringing it up again now? "What's going on? What are you planning? Been quiet about it." "If we told you, you'd just fuss about it." "So, me being fussy, why did you keep quiet?" "Man, you're really clueless, aren't you?" Kyle said, gesturing towards my parents' house with his arm. "We're gonna fix up your grandparents' place and turn it into a rental for tourists." "What?" What was this guy talking about? That's right, you're so clueless. Your family home, it's ours now, right? We're gonna use it to host guests. I didn't hear anything about this. Of course, you didn't. I figured you'd be against it if I told you. Anger flared up inside me. My childhood home, lovingly maintained by my parents and their parents before them. Now they intended to desecrate it? You're saying you quit your job for this? There was an early retirement package. The company wanted to downsize, so I took the opportunity. Without even discussing it with me? Well, I told you. If I had mentioned it, you'd have opposed it. Of course, I would have. That lazy wife works part-time for peanuts. Exactly. The lady who doesn't lift a finger for part-time work back home should work from dawn till dusk here. Who said I never did part-time work? As the three of them ganged up on me, shadows emerged from inside the house. Oh, Mom and Dad? And then over there? If it isn't too noisy outside, I thought it was shameful for adults to be acting like this. Coming out were Mark and Julie. What's with you two? It's a weekday, isn't it? Unfortunately, that's our line. Dad, it's a weekday, right? For your information, we college students are already on our long break, right? Yeah. The close siblings exchanged glances. Man, college students have it easy. Don't you realize you're in college because of the money your father earned? You lack gratitude. Then, as if on cue, the two kids burst into laughter. Hey! What's so funny? We're laughing because Dad knows nothing, or rather, chose not to know, right? Right. They shared a laugh. Regardless of high school, we haven't spent a penny of Dad's money on our college tuition or living expenses. We could even pay you back in full if you'd like. What? Kyle and my in-laws were equally shocked. What do you mean, Michelle? So, I took this chance to speak up. You guys didn't know? What are you talking about? So, you were unaware. The kids' tuition came out of their own accounts. Huh? Their mouths dropped open in unison. Well, I only found out about this recently myself. Standing around in the yard talking is tiring. How about we go inside? Mark suggested lazily, gesturing for us to come in. But Mark, what about the work? If it's not in the work area, it's fine. Then let's go to the kitchen. Knowing the house well, the kids hurried us into the entrance. From the open sliding glass doors, I could see a blue tarp and some cables indicating ongoing work. But there was no sound of machinery. Just a hint of movement. They've already started working. No matter what you say, a done deal is a done deal. My in-laws said, looking pleased. Kyle snorted at me. It seemed they hadn't realized their mistake. Maybe I could leave the next part to the kids. Cheerfully, my in-laws tried to enter the living room immediately to the right of the entrance. But Mark quickly corrected them. No, not there. The living room is off limits. The kitchen, as Mark mentioned, was down the hallway to the left at the stairs. When I was growing up, the kitchen was on the right. But after I moved out following my marriage, I heard it had been renovated into a larger bath and utility space, thinking it would be useful when my parents needed care. Indeed, my mother passed away in a hospital before needing care, and my father was healthy until a year before his death. Still, they must have anticipated inconveniences with the old bath. Thanks to that, the space became comfortable for the two kids who later moved in. The kitchen now was where two rooms had been combined into a dining area, with remnants of the old kitchen across the corridor. We were instructed to sit at the table that now dominated the kitchen. Can't you at least serve coffee? This is why people say you're not brought up right. We serve those who should be served. Here you go, Mom. Julie said, pouring tea just for me and themselves. What's with that attitude? Well, as the owners of this house, we obviously can't extend any courtesy to someone who wanted to weirdly remodel it. Mark said with a sardonic look at the three others except me. You knew about this? And that you're the owner? I snorted in silence. That's right, you didn't know? There's such a thing as being too disengaged. So what? Mark picked up a tablet that was lying nearby and accessed a certain website. Look. He thrust the screen towards Kyle. This is the application we filed. and they sent us this registration document. Sure enough, the screen displayed a registration document. Man, everything's so convenient now. You can get all this online. The registration document showed that the building and the entire property, along with the name on the deed, was in your name? Kyle murmured, looking up at Mark with a trembling voice. That's right. Grandpa here had left the house and land, enough funds to manage it, and also the costs for college for Julie and me. You wouldn't know since you didn't come to the funeral. Kyle groaned. How could you not tell me something so important? Well, why you're here now is proof enough, isn't it? Julie said, setting down a glass of water in front of the three. To turn this precious home into a rental? What are you even talking about? Do you even realize the architectural value of this house? You have no idea. What's this young one talking about? In my youth, there were plenty of houses like this. In your youth, huh? But they're not around anymore, are they? Mark swung his head around flamboyantly. Do you know how valuable that transom over there is? Despite being opened up, the place used to be 2 rooms. The transom was apparently left as is. A beautiful craftsmanship remains between what used to be 2 rooms. And you don't even know why we didn't modernize the kitchen to face south, do you? Saying that, they stood up as if to say, follow us. I immediately got up too. I understood what they wanted to show right away. Heading towards one of the 3 rooms across the middle corridor, Mark and Julie slid open the Fusuma doors. Oh, what's up, Mark? Said someone who was climbing up a ladder on top of a blue tarp. With all the doors to the adjoining rooms open, a few young men in overalls were working with surveying equipment and small brushes. Professor, could you drill into these people the value of this house? Oh? The person referred to as the professor came down from the ladder. Oh, are you the ones who plan to remodel this place into a Western-style room without permission? At that, my in-laws' temples seemed to throb visibly. Yes, that's them. I brought them all here, so please, Professor, give them a proper lecture. The professor approached us with a look of genuine enjoyment. Nice to meet you. I'm the seminar instructor for Mark here at the university. Instructor? Yes. The professor handed over a business card that clearly stated his position as the dean of the architecture department at Mark's university. That professor is... Oh, when he eagerly joined our seminar, I heard about this house. And when I listened closely, it turned out to be a central hallway-style house built a long time ago. Huh? It's just an old, common house. That's an ignorant statement. The professor smiled broadly and stepped forward. Do you understand the value of this lighting? Everyone looked up simultaneously. It's just a round light cover, isn't it? With some weird pattern. Oh dear, you don't know this pattern is Art Nouveau? From there, the professor led the lecture. The lighting cover, likely original, was frosted glass with an Art Nouveau-style plant design. The glass in the middle of the exterior shoji doors featured an Art Deco-style geometric pattern. And the exterior glass doors also used cutting-edge designs from that time. What's amazing is that these are still beautifully preserved today. And what about that? Do you even know where this is? The professor tilted his head as if to say they didn't understand. We're a bit far, but this is still downtown. How important it is that a wooden structure be built and keep its original form. Then, Julie moved to the next room. Please explain this part too. The 3 looked puzzled at what could be next. The person Julie called was a young man using a feather duster and cotton swabs near the alcove. Hi. I work as a curator at a museum. I'm a graduate of Julie's university, so yeah, I guess that makes me a senior. The 3 were shocked to find yet another profession unrelated to them getting involved. Man, this house is truly a treasure trove. Huh? No, the owners here decided it's important to preserve it, so they're donating it to the museum. Look at this vase, for example. The curator pointed to a vase displayed at the end of the middle corridor. What's this? It has a pretty pattern, but it looks quite dirty. Well, it's a bit dirty because it's from China's Ming Dynasty. The beauty of this plant pattern glaze is just exquisite. What? They seemed not to catch on immediately. To put it roughly, that's about 500 years ago. I interjected. Then my in-laws gasped in surprise. Such an antique? Yes, there are still many more like this around the house. This hanging scroll, for instance, is a work from a young master of painting. Though its existence was known, the actual piece had been missing. My mother-in-law shrieked. Well, such items were collected by the previous and the one before the previous generations of this house. And they've all survived tumultuous times. Then Kyle was taken aback. Julie, you're donating it to the museum? Yes. It would be terrible if they were carelessly destroyed. Idiot. If it's so valuable, why wouldn't you sell it for money? Julie sighed deeply. That's why we never told you, even though Grandpa talked about it. Because you say things like that. What are you saying to your parents? You see, inheriting such items is a huge responsibility. With taxes and everything, how could we leave them in a place where people might just tear them down without thinking? Indeed, they must have learned a lot from their father about these matters. By the way, we got the renovation request from one of our graduates. The professor interjected again. That's leaking customer information, isn't it? Kyle retorted. Well, he wasn't wrong. No, we just got the information that a building we knew was in danger. The graduate just passed on the rumor, and then we asked Mark. There was a plan I didn't know about, and I rushed to the contractor in a panic. If they had proceeded with the construction, it would have been a huge issue for the contractor too. I had them immediately stop the plan. Kyle let out a defeated sound. If the construction had proceeded, I would have sued you for damages. Mark glared as he said this. What about that car? Some of the contractors just happen to be graduates who love modern architecture. It's an architecture department, after all. Right? Mark and the professor exchanged glances. That's how you talk to your father? Kyle lunged at Mark. But there was no match between a nearly 50-year-old desk worker and a 20-something son in the prime of his youth. Kyle couldn't even make Mark flinch. A person who didn't show up to Grandpa's funeral isn't someone I'd acknowledge as my father. Me neither. Right. The kids looked at me. Yes. And I don't want to be with you, or with him, anymore. You, speaking so formally? That's because you all always complained, so I adapted my way of speaking. I used to talk like this, remember? Then Kyle exploded. Your way of speaking always seemed like you were looking down on me. Yeah, a wife who couldn't fit in with the way we do things. I realized that after I got married. Indeed, I only realized after the wedding. I had always pretended to be something I was not. My in-laws, the relatives, their boorishness, their inability to distinguish between what's theirs and what's not, I hated it. I never imagined you'd think you could make my family home yours. My in-laws were at a loss for words. Kyle, I'm divorcing you. The kids are grown up and don't need child support. That's fine, right? Divorce, huh? Fine, let's do it. But make sure the property division is fair. Property division. I laughed. What property are you talking about? What? Do you think I don't know about you squandering our savings on your whims? Why would you? No, that's not it. Kyle shouted. It's about the share you inherited from my father. It's supposed to be joint marital property, isn't it? Unfortunately, there's no such thing. What do you mean? Right? The kids looked at each other. That's why people who don't come to funerals are no good. Exactly. Because he's that kind of person, not only did my brother and I inherit this house, but he also didn't report to Mom about the significant amount of savings made before they got married. That's the situation. Honestly, I didn't know about it either, but there's no need to mention that here. My parents, it seems, thought about what might happen if something happened to the person I married, regardless of who he was. And as a form of insurance, they had made a substantial part of their assets into a savings account in my name since I was still a student. Being their only daughter, They were probably worried about what would happen if they were old and something happened to me. That's why they had consulted with my much older brothers and had allocated a considerable sum in advance. My brothers are all in their mid to late 50s now and hold significant positions at their workplaces, so they didn't particularly need the inheritance. Well, I was surprised when, after the funeral, I was told, "Your husband is someone we can't quite trust, so be careful." That also became a catalyst for investigating what Kyle was doing. "Wasn't it that you were fired, not that you quit?" I played a recording of the conversation with his boss on the day of the funeral. Well, I thought I might use it at some point. "Way to go, Mom," the kids cheered. "Oh, so that's why there were packages coming here recently." "What?" "Oh, there was also a message from the woman you went on vacation with while supposedly on leave." I played the recorder on my phone. No, that's not the kind of relationship we have." "It was strictly professional," echoed an emphasized voice. Kyle's face turned red instantly. "Wow, sounds pretty good in here." "The wood's strong, Professor." Gritting his teeth, Kyle turned his back on us, faced his parents, and yelled, "Let's go home, Mom and Dad. Screw this place. Actually, I'll be staying here. I'll live in this house I love with these kids. You'll receive the divorce papers through a lawyer, so make sure to sign them out properly." "What?" Kyle glared at me with fierce eyes. Ignoring him, I turned to my in-laws, "And with you too, I'd like to sever ties as well. Please don't interfere with us anymore," I said with a smile that cleared away all the repressed feelings towards my in-laws. After that, I decided to continue living in my parents' house and would hear about Kyle and their situation through a lawyer. It seemed they were in quite a predicament. Kyle had taken early retirement all right, but was floundering without a clear plan for what to do next, living off his severance package in his late 40s. Without finding another job, his social insurance would be cut off. He had thought about starting a business, but that was largely dependent on the house he no longer had, and now he was spending his days at the job center trying to find re-employment. The part of his severance that turned into my alimony must have hurt too. And as for my in-laws, they were in trouble as well. They had planned to sell their home and land for retirement funds, but it turned out the property violated building standards. Mark had told me. This area had a bit of a scandal similar to a construction company's fakery issue. "What do you mean?" "Well, you know Dad's hometown area was kind of a new town, right? Now that you mention it. There was a rapid sale of visually appealing but cheaply made houses. However, the materials were subpar. Combined with various issues related to the land, what was barely legal under the old building codes is now illegal. And that means such non-conforming buildings can't be sold." "Wow!" I was genuinely surprised. "So, the house can't be sold. It has to be demolished to be worth anything." The lawyer said my in-laws had already consulted a real estate agent. But as Mark said, they were told only the land had value. In their mid to late 70s and having given up their driver's licenses, they had wanted to move to a more comfortable place using the money from selling their house and land. The news from Kyle must have excited them about living near the city. However, it seems the land, being in a declining regional city, wouldn't fetch much. Moreover, demolishing the house would cost a significant amount. Even if the land sells for $200,000, having to spend $60,000 to $80,000 on demolition is what they're saying. Does that mean it'll be halved? The plan's totally ruined, huh? If the remaining amount isn't significant, who knows what will happen. Currently, they say Kyle has moved into his apartment. But if Kyle doesn't find a job, moving to an even cheaper place will only be a matter of time. Then, 3 months later. Congratulations! With that, the professor and the people from Mark's seminar group gathered around the large kitchen table in the room, signaling a toast. This was because, after consulting with my children, I decided to turn the second floor of this spacious house into a boarding house for students with meals included. The large bathroom are just right for several people to live in. And now, 3 students from the seminar are moving into this house. It seems that the students studying to be architects are happy just to live in the house itself. The day that group came and said, "It would be nice to live in a house like this," made me reconsider how to use this house. My ex-husband Kyle had said he wanted to turn it into a rental property. The idea of turning a large house into something is not bad in itself. The problem is how to use it. If Kyle had suggested using almost the exact form of the house, I might have considered it. But Kyle didn't think that way. He only wanted to follow the trend. What would happen to this important house if such a place were opened? However, hosting students who love historical architecture isn't a bad thing. Having been a homemaker for over 20 years, I think it's not a bad way to start anew. Plus, there are still treasures to be found, Julie said. I hadn't paid much attention, but there's also a basement in this house, and there are things down there that haven't been checked yet. With the curator senior moving in, the work, doubling as fun and study, will likely continue in the future. I plan to live in this beloved house of mine for as long as possible, enjoying every moment.